Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. Long before the Seven Kingdoms were ever dreamed of, when the world was wild and nameless, and men still feared the whispering of the woods, Westeros was a land of endless forests and silver rivers. The first men had only just crossed the land bridge from Essos, bringing with them bronze swords, stone axes, and the fire of their new gods. They raised cairns and wooden halls, cut trees to make way for their fields, and believed they would tame the land as easily as they had tamed the seas. But the land did not yield. The trees seemed to watch them. The wind carried voices not their own, and at night, when the mists gathered, strange shapes moved between the trunks, small and swift, with eyes like molten gold, the children of the forest. It was in those days that a young warrior named Serwyn of the Stony Shore walked the northern woods with the weariness of one who had seen too much death. His people had fought the children for years, burning their groves and cutting down their heart trees, those pale-barked weirwoods whose carved faces bled red sap like tears. Yet even victory tasted bitter to Serwyn now. Each battle felt like a wound upon the earth itself. One gray morning, as smoke still curled from a half-burned weirwood grove, Serwyn wandered apart from his men. He carried his sword, yes, but loosely, without hunger for another kill. The mist hung thick, muffling the forest into silence. He had never known quiet like this, a silence so deep it pressed against his heart. Then he heard it, a faint cry, thin and high, like the mewling of an animal in pain. He followed the sound through the bracken and found a fallen tree, its roots torn from the ground by fire. Beneath it lay a small figure, neither beast nor child, but something between. Her skin was brown as bark, her hair a tangle of moss and leaves. Her golden eyes met his, filled with pain and defiance. A child of the forest. Serwyn froze. His people said the children's blood was poison, their words curses, yet the creature beneath the tree was no monster. She was small, fragile, pinned and gasping. The trunk had caught her leg. Her breathing came shallow and sharp. He should have called for his brothers. They would have finished it quickly. But something in him rebelled. He sheathed his sword. "Be still," he said softly. "You'll die if I leave you here." The child bared her small, sharp teeth. "Better that than your blade." Serwyn hesitated. Then with a grunt, he lifted the fallen branch. She cried out once but did not strike him. When the weight was gone, she scrambled back, pressing her hand to her wound. He stepped away. "Go then. I will not stop you." She stared at him as if unsure whether men could speak truth. Then, limping, she vanished into the mist. Serwyn thought that was the end of it. He returned to his camp, said nothing. The men of the Stony Shore broke camp by nightfall, moving east toward their next war. Yet that night, when the others slept, Serwyn dreamed of the forest, of pale trees whispering in the wind and red leaves drifting like blood upon snow. A voice, soft as rain, whispered through the dream, "Why spare one of the old ones?" He saw her again in his dream, the child he had saved, standing beneath a dying tree whose roots curled through bones and stones. "The earth remembers kindness," she said, "and the forest repays its debts." When he woke, the fire was low and a shape crouched just beyond its light. Serwyn reached for his sword, then stopped. It was her again, the child of the forest, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You came to kill me?" he asked. She shook her head. "To ask your help. The forest dies. The old gods sleep. But there is a place where they might wake again, if one of your kind has the courage to plant the seed." He frowned. "What seed?" She reached into a pouch at her side and drew forth something small. A pale kernel, smooth as bone, pulsing faintly as if alive. "The first seed of the heart tree," she whispered. "The first weirwood. If it takes root, the wars will end. But if it dies, so will the old gods, and all who walk their woods." Serwyn stared at her, torn between disbelief and dread. "You ask a man of war to grow a tree?" Her gaze did not waver. "I ask a man who spared me once to spare the world again." A wind rose then, and the fire guttered low. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded, his people's signal. Dawn was breaking. Serwyn looked toward the sound, then back at the child. "If I go with you," he said quietly, "where must we go?" She pointed south, toward the lands of mists and lakes. "To the Isle of Faces," she said, "where the first men made war upon the gods. There, the seed must be planted." Serwyn hesitated only a heartbeat longer. Then he nodded. "Then I will go." And so began their journey, a man of bronze and a child of leaf and shadow, into the wild heart of a land that would one day be called Westeros, though no map yet named it. Neither knew that the road ahead would be written in blood, and that from their choices would grow the weirwoods that watched men for thousands of years to come. The mists closed behind them. The forest held its breath. The old gods, silent for an age, began to stir once more. The dawn that followed was gray and cold. Mist coiled through the trees, softening the shapes of the forest into ghosts. Serwyn walked beside the child of the forest, his boots sinking into the damp earth. The air smelled of pine and ashes, for behind them the men of the stony shore had burned another grove, another wound upon the land. He tried not to think of it, but the smoke followed them like a curse. The child moved with a quiet grace that made no sound upon the ground. Even wounded, she was quicker than any man. Her small hands brushed the leaves as they passed, whispering words in a tongue he could not understand. At times, he thought he saw the trees bend slightly toward her, as if listening. After a while, she spoke without looking at him. "You do not trust me." Serwyn gave a grim smile. "I've been taught not to trust your kind." "Then why follow me?" He paused before answering. "Because you said the wars could end. I've seen too many of them, too many graves filled with the bones of my kin and yours." The child turned her golden eyes upon him. "Men forget their dead. The trees do not." They walked in silence for a time after that. The forest grew denser, the trees older, their trunks twisted and pale as bone. Once, Serwyn thought he glimpsed eyes carved into the bark, not crude marks of men's knives, but shapes grown from the wood itself. They watched him as he passed, and though he told himself it was fancy, his skin prickled all the same. At midday, they came upon a stream that glimmered like silver beneath the weak sun. The child knelt to drink, her reflection rippling in the water. Serwyn followed, kneeling beside her. The water was cold and sweet, but when he looked up, he saw her watching him. "You have a name?" he asked. "Leaf in the Dew," she said. "It is the name my mothers gave me." "Serwyn," he said simply. "I know." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "The trees told me." He frowned. "The trees talk to you?" She nodded. "They remember everything that touches their roots. They remember the first dawn, and they remember the coming of your people." when the ground trembled beneath your feet and your axes sang in the woods. The trees cry out still. Serwyn looked away. We did what we must to live. And so did we, she said softly. Now we both die for it. When the sun began to fall, they made camp at the edge of a clearing. Serwyn built a small fire, though Leaf seemed uneasy at the sight of it. Fire is hunger, she said. It eats and leaves nothing but ash. So do men, he muttered, but she did not reply. As the night deepened, the forest grew restless. The wind carried distant howls. Wolves, or worse. Serwyn kept his sword close, though he knew it would do little against the things that moved in these woods. He found himself watching Leaf as she sat cross-legged beside the fire, her eyes half closed, her lips moving in silent prayer. After a while, she opened them again and said, "The seed will not grow if we fail. It must reach the isle before the next moon turns." "Why there?" he asked. "The isle is sacred," she said. "Long before your kind came, it was the heart of the old gods. Their power sleeps beneath its roots. If the seed is planted there, their voices will wake again." Serwyn stared into the flames. "And what if they wake angry? Then perhaps they will judge both our peoples," she said, "but better judgment than silence." He slept little that night. The forest whispered too loudly, and once he thought he saw figures moving between the trees, small, dark shapes, eyes glinting gold. He woke with his hand on his sword, but when he looked again, there was nothing there. By morning, they were moving again. The land changed as they went. The pines gave way to willows, and the ground grew soft underfoot. They had entered the marshes that guarded the southern lakes. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the buzz of unseen insects. Once, Serwyn's boot slipped, and he sank knee-deep into black mud. Leaf pulled him free with surprising strength, but his pack was lost. He cursed under his breath. "You carry too much iron," she said. "The earth does not like it." "It's kept me alive," he grunted. "It will kill you here," she replied. That night, they found refuge on a low rise surrounded by water. Serwyn built no fire this time. The air was warm, and the sounds of the swamp, croaks, hisses, ripples, filled the silence. Leaf slept with her hand upon the pouch that held the seed, as though guarding a child. In the deepest hour of night, Serwyn dreamed again. He stood in a forest of white trees whose faces wept red tears. A voice whispered from the roots, "Blood and sap, one and the same. To plant life, death must feed it." He woke with a start, heart pounding. Leaf was awake too, staring into the dark. "You heard it?" he asked. She nodded. "The old gods stir. They know you now." He swallowed hard. "And what do they want of me?" "To see if your heart is worthy," she said. The next day they came upon signs of pursuit, prints in the mud, booted feet not bare. Serwyn knelt to study them, his jaw tightening. "My kin," he said. "They're tracking us." Leaf's gaze darkened. "If they find us, they'll kill us both." Serwyn rose. "Then we must move faster." They did, pushing through the marsh until their legs ached. By dusk, they reached a narrow river winding through the reeds. A broken bridge of ancient stone crossed it, relic of some forgotten age. As they began to cross, arrows hissed through the air. One struck the stone beside Serwyn's head. "Down!" he shouted. Leaf dove behind a fallen slab as men burst from the trees, armored, shouting his name. "Serwyn! You've gone mad, boy! Leave the creature and come back!" The voice was one he knew. Morthal, the high seer of his tribe, his father's old companion. Serwyn rose just enough to see him, a tall, hard man with a face like weathered rock, a bronze crown upon his brow. "Morthal," he called, "there's no need for blood." "There's always need," Morthal replied grimly. "You carry the devil's seed. Give it up, and perhaps the gods of men will forgive you." Serwyn hesitated. Then Leif's voice came soft but fierce. "If he takes it, the forests will die forever." Serwyn met her gaze and made his choice. He turned back to Morthal. "The gods of men are blind," he said, drawing his sword. "I'll not let you kill what I mean to save." Morthal's eyes hardened. "Then you are lost." The air filled with the hiss of arrows. Serwyn grabbed Leif's hand, and together they plunged into the river below as shafts rained around them. The cold water swallowed their cries, and the current carried them into darkness. Behind them, the bridge burned. Ahead, the Isle of Faces waited, and the fate of all who prayed to the Weirwoods. The river was cruel and cold, its black waters dragging Serwyn beneath again and again. The current tore at his armor, pulling him through tangles of roots and reeds. He surfaced once, gasping for breath, only to see Leif struggling beside him, her small hands fighting the pull of the current. Without thinking, he reached for her, catching her arm just as a wave broke over them both. They tumbled through the dark until the water grew shallow and the river spat them out upon a bank of mud and stones. Serwyn lay gasping, coughing out river water, his chest heaving. When he lifted his head, the night sky swirled above them, a shroud of gray clouds hiding the moon. "Leif," he called hoarsely. "I am here," came her soft voice. She sat a few feet away, soaked to the bone, her golden eyes dimmed but alive. Her pouch, he saw, was still clutched tight against her breast. Serwyn dragged himself to her side. "You kept hold of it." "I would sooner drown than lose it," she whispered. He looked downriver, where the current vanished into fog. "Morthal will think us dead." "For now," she said. "But he is a hunter of men. He will not stop." Serwyn nodded grimly. "Then neither will we." They spent that night huddled beneath a fallen tree, shivering as they dried their clothes beside a small fire built from driftwood. Leif rested her head against the bark, eyes half closed, while Serwyn kept watch. The forest here was different, quieter, older, the air heavy with the scent of moss and rain. When morning came, the mists were thick as wool. They followed the river south, walking through a world of ghosts. The trees grew gnarled and pale, and strange whispers came from beneath the water. Leif would glance toward the sound now and then, as if recognizing old voices. "What do they say?" Serwyn asked once. "They remember the pact that never was," she murmured. "The first men swore to honor the woods, and then broke their word before the roots had cooled. Men break oaths as easily as branches," Serwyn said, "even to each other." She gave him a long look. "Do you?" He hesitated. "Not yet." By midday, they reached the edge of a vast marshland. The river widened into a lake so still it seemed made of glass. Mist drifted above its surface, and in its heart lay small isles crowned with willows. "The Isle of Faces lies beyond these waters," Leif said quietly. "But we must pass through the Fen of Echoes first. The dead walk there." Serwyn's jaw tightened. "Then we'll walk faster." The fen was a maze of black water and gray reeds. The air was thick and wet, filled with the hum of unseen insects. They moved carefully, each step sinking into the soft earth. The mist thickened until Serwyn could scarcely see a yard ahead. Once, he thought he heard footsteps behind them. He turned quickly, sword drawn, but saw only ripples spreading across the water. They follow, Leaf whispered. Your people are not far. He swore softly. Morthal won't give up until we're dead. Then we reach the isle before he does, she said. They pressed on. The ground gave way to water, and they waded waist deep through the mire. Serwyn's armor dragged him down, each step a struggle. At last, Leaf turned to him. You must shed the iron, she said. The metal offends the old powers. It will drag you under. He hesitated. His sword had kept him alive through a dozen battles. The armor bore the sigils of his clan. To cast them aside felt like betraying everything he was. Trust me, she said softly. If you do not, you'll sink before the isle. With a curse, Serwyn unbuckled the bronze plates and let them fall into the dark water. He kept only his sword, though even that seemed to weigh heavier now. They moved on until the fog began to thin. The reeds parted, revealing a stretch of open water, and beyond it, faint through the mist, the silhouette of a great island. Its trees rose high and pale, their leaves crimson in the dim light. The Isle of Faces, Leaf breathed. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but reverence. A strange calm settled over the lake. No birds sang. The water lay still as glass. Serwyn could see reflections of faces in it, not their own, but others, countless and shifting. Old, young, weeping, smiling, vanishing before his eyes. They're watching, Leaf said. The old gods. Then let them see we've come this far, Serwyn replied. They found a narrow bar of earth stretching toward the isle, half sunk beneath the lake. Serwyn tested it with his foot, firm enough. He led the way, step by step, the water rising around his knees. Halfway across, the ground trembled. A low moan echoed from beneath the lake, followed by a bubbling of black water. Keep moving, Leaf hissed. Then it rose, a shape of rotted wood and bone, tall as two men, its face carved with weirwood features twisted into horror. Water streamed from its limbs as it lumbered toward them, its eyes glowing faintly red. Serwyn drew his sword. What is it? Once a guardian, Leaf said. Now corrupted. The wars poisoned the waters, and the old protectors turned mad. The creature swung a branch-like arm toward them. Serwyn dodged, splashing through the water, and slashed at its side. His blade bit deep, and dark sap spurted forth, but the thing did not fall. Go, he shouted. Get to the isle. Leaf hesitated. Not without you. Now, he roared. She ran, the seed pressed tight in her hand. Serwyn turned to face the creature again, ducking as another massive arm crashed down. He rolled aside, stabbing upward through the rotted trunk. The blade stuck fast. With a grunt, he wrenched it free, then drove it through the creature's chest. A shudder passed through it. For a heartbeat, its face seemed to soften, the carved eyes weeping red tears. Then it fell apart, collapsing into the water with a sound like a sigh. Serwyn stood panting, watching as the dark sap spread around him. Then he turned and stumbled toward the shore, where Leaf waited, eyes wide with both fear and awe. You killed a guardian, she whispered. I freed it, he said. They stepped onto the isle together. The air changed at once, cooler, stiller, heavy with a strange power. All around them stood weirwoods, their faces calm and solemn, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Leaf knelt and pressed her palm to the earth. They remember us, she murmured. They remember everything. Serwyn looked across the grove. In the center stood a great tree, older than the rest, its trunk split by lightning, its roots curling through stone and bone. It was dying, half its leaves blackened, the sap oozing dark and slow. This is where the seed must be planted, Leaf said. in the heart of the Old One, where the gods' voices are faintest. Serwyn sheathed his sword and approached. Then let's do it before Morthal finds us. But even as he spoke, the wind shifted, and far across the lake came the distant sound of horns. Leaf met his gaze, fear flickering in her eyes. They are here. Serwyn's hand went to his sword once more. Then the forest must choose its side, he said quietly, and so must I. The old gods seemed to whisper in reply, their voices rustling through the red leaves. The Isle of Faces waited to decide the fate of both man and child. The horns echoed across the lake like the calls of dying beasts, their sound swallowed and scattered by the mist. Serwyn knew that tone, the long, low note that called warriors to the hunt. Morthal's men had found their trail again. There would be no more hiding. Leaf rose from the roots of the great dying tree, her eyes fierce and golden. We have little time, she said. The seed must be planted now, before they reach the shore. Serwyn unslung his cloak and drew his sword. Then do what you must. I'll see they don't interrupt. The child of the forest moved to the foot of the great heart tree. The bark was cold, slick with blackened sap, and its carved face had nearly faded beneath the scars of old fire. Yet as she knelt, the earth seemed to shiver. She drew the pale seed from her pouch. It pulsed faintly in her small hands, glowing as if it held the heartbeat of the world itself. She began to speak in her own tongue, soft, lilting words that carried like wind through leaves. Serwyn turned toward the sound of the horns. From the far shore, shadows began to gather. Men in bronze and leather, torches flaring in the gloom. Morthal rode at their head, a dark figure beneath a black wolf's pelt. His voice rose above the others, deep and commanding. Serwyn, come out and face your kin. No man betrays his blood and lives. Serwyn's fingers tightened on his sword hilt. I am no traitor, he murmured. Not to blood that still beats. The wind shifted, and for an instant the mist parted. He saw their faces clearly. Men he had fought beside, broken bread with, sworn oaths beside the fire. Now they were his hunters. Leaf's voice grew louder, faster, her words weaving through the air like song. The ground beneath the heart tree began to glow faintly red, the color of old blood. The seed in her hands trembled as though alive. Then a crack split the silence. The sound of arrows loosed. Shafts hissed through the air and thudded into the roots around her. Serwyn, she cried. He was already moving. He raised his shield, the last remnant of his armor, and caught the next arrow on its bronze face. Another grazed his shoulder, slicing cloth and skin. He didn't flinch. Keep planting, he shouted. Don't stop. Leaf pressed the seed into the hollow at the base of the dying tree. Her voice became a whisper, and her hands sank into the soil. The roots shuddered beneath her touch, twisting like living serpents. On the far shore, Morthal raised his hand. Across, he bellowed. The first of the men plunged into the lake. Their torches hissed and sputtered as the water swallowed them. But still they came, wading and swimming, their bronze blades gleaming like fireflies in the mist. Serwyn stepped to the edge of the grove, sword drawn, heart steady. The world seemed to narrow until all that existed was the space between him and the men who approached. The first warrior to reach him was one he knew, Darren, his cousin by blood. His face was wet and pale, his eyes hard with hate. You've lost your wits, Serwyn, he spat. Fighting beside demons now. Serwyn's answer was a silent blow. Their blades met with a clang of bronze and sparks. Darren struck again, faster this time, but Serwyn turned the blade aside and drove his shoulder into him, sending him stumbling back into the water. Behind him, Leaf gasped. The ground at the tree's base began to pulse with light. Red, then white, then crimson again. The seed was taking root, but Serwyn had no time to look. More men came ashore, spreading out through the grove. He fought them one by one, the clash of blades echoing beneath the Weirwood's watchful faces. For a moment, he almost believed they could win. Then Morthal himself stepped from the mist. The old man was a giant still, though years had bowed his shoulders. His eyes burned with zeal, his voice low and steady. "Step aside, boy," he said. "You don't know what you defend." "I know enough," Serwyn answered. "You defend the death of your kind. That seed is rot. The forest will swallow all men if it grows." Serwyn shook his head. "No. If it grows, there may be peace." "There is no peace," Morthal said, lifting his great bronze sword. "Only the rule of gods, or the ruin of them." Their blades met. Sparks flew as bronze bit bronze. Morthal was older, but stronger than Serwyn remembered. Each strike came like thunder. Serwyn parried, stepped back, and countered, their swords ringing through the grove. Behind them, the Weirwood stirred. Leaves rustled though no wind blew. The earth groaned softly, and faint voices whispered through the roots. Leaf knelt by the great tree, blood streaming down her hands. The seed had sunk deep into the soil now, but the bark of the tree was cracking, splitting wider and wider. "Serwyn," she cried, "the tree needs blood, yours or mine. The old gods demand a price." He heard her, but could not answer. Morthal pressed him hard, his sword cutting deep into Serwyn's side. Pain seared through him. He staggered but held his ground. "Yield," Morthal said grimly. "Let the forest burn, and I'll see your name cleansed." Serwyn met his gaze. "I've burned enough, old man." He feigned a stumble, then swung low, driving his blade into Morthal's leg. The High Seer roared in pain, swinging wildly. Serwyn stepped in close and struck again, their blades locked at the hilt. For a heartbeat, they stood chest to chest. Morthal's eyes burned into his. "You damn us all," he hissed. Serwyn pushed him back. "Then I'll stand damned, so long as the forest lives." He drove his sword through Morthal's heart. The old man's breath caught. His hands fell to his sides. He sank slowly to his knees, then toppled among the roots. Silence fell. The lake was still. The last of Morthal's men froze where they stood, staring in disbelief. Then the ground began to tremble. Leaf cried out as the heart tree split open. From its trunk burst a surge of red light, bright as fire yet cold as the stars. The men cried out, shielding their eyes. Roots rose from the earth, twisting around the fallen, dragging them down into the soil. Serwyn stumbled toward Leaf. "What's happening?" "The seed lives," she said, her voice weak but filled with wonder. "It drinks the blood of man and tree alike." He reached her just as the light began to fade. The great tree stood whole again, its bark pale as bone, its leaves crimson and trembling. In its trunk was a new face, neither man's nor child's, but both, carved by no hand. Serwyn sank to his knees. His wound bled freely now, soaking the earth. Leaf caught him as he fell. "Stay," she whispered. "It is done." He looked up at the face in the tree. The carved eyes seemed to weep, red tears running down its bark. "The gods," he murmured. "They watch. They remember," she said. "Always." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe they'll remember me kindly." The light dimmed. The mist rolled in once more. When it cleared, the men who had followed Morthal were gone, swallowed by root and water. Only the tree remained, and beneath it, Serwyn's body, lying still as stone. Leaf pressed her hand to his chest, then to the roots. Blood for sap, she whispered. Man for tree. Thus the pact is sealed. The great Weirwood's leaves stirred as if in answer, and somewhere far off, thunder rolled across the sky. The first Weirwood of Westeros had taken root, and the land would never be the same again. When dawn came at last, it rose pale and cold over the Isle of Faces. Mist drifted through the trees like ghosts returning home. The lake was silent once more, its black waters calm, though red leaves floated upon it like the traces of spilled blood. The battle had ended, and the grove stood reborn. At the heart of the isle, the new Weirwood towered high, pale as moonlight, its leaves crimson and trembling in the soft wind. Beneath its spreading boughs lay Serwyn of the stony shore, his body resting against the roots as though he merely slept. His sword had fallen from his grasp, half buried in the soil that drank his blood. Leaf in the Dew knelt beside him. Her small hand brushed his cheek, cold and still. "Your part is done," she whispered, "but the forest remembers." The face carved in the Weirwood, the face that had not been carved by any mortal hand, seemed to gaze upon them both. The red sap that ran from its eyes glistened like tears in the morning light. To Leaf it felt alive, as though it breathed and watched and whispered in a voice too ancient for men to hear. She rose and turned to the still waters beyond the grove. Across the lake, the mist had begun to lift, revealing the northern forests where the first men dwelled. They would come again, in time, drawn by the sight of the pale tree, by tales of those who vanished upon the isle. And perhaps, when they came, the gods would speak through the roots and leaves as they once had before the wars. But Leaf knew the old gods were slow to forgive. She wrapped Serwyn's cloak around him, binding his sword across his chest, and sang the words of parting, the tongue of the children, older than any man's tongue. Her voice was low, sorrowful, yet there was strength in it too. As she sang, the roots stirred, curling around the fallen man like gentle arms. "Rest, Serwyn of the stony shore," she whispered. "May your blood feed the earth that you spared. May your name be carried on the wind." The roots drew him slowly beneath the soil. In moments he was gone, his grave unmarked, his memory taken into the heart tree's endless dream. Leaf stood alone before the new Weirwood. The sun had climbed higher, cutting through the mist in spears of light. She could feel the gods stirring beneath her feet, ancient powers waking after centuries of sleep. The seed had taken, but at a cost that would echo for ages. A voice stirred within the leaves, faint and distant, neither male nor female, but vast as the forest itself. "The blood of man and the will of the wood are one. So shall it ever be." Leaf bowed her head. "So it shall." She turned from the grove, for her task was not yet done. The first men would come again, and the children would need warning. The wars were not over, though a fragile peace might yet be sown like seeds in a long winter. She crossed the isle to where the trees grew thickest, where the shadows clung even in daylight. There she knelt and pressed her hand to the ground. The soil was rich with the power of the new Weirwood. From her fingers sprouted a cluster of small white shoots, roots taking hold in the dark. "Children of the forest," she whispered into the wind. "Come to me. The heart of the gods beats here once more." The air shimmered. From the shadows crept figures small and lithe, eyes glimmering gold. They came silently, a dozen or more, moving with the grace of wild things. One of them, older than the rest, stepped forward, his skin gray as weathered bark, his hair thin and pale. "Leaf in the Dew," he said, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "We thought you lost." "I was nearly so," she answered, "but the seed has taken root. The first of the heart trees stands again." The elder's golden eyes flickered toward the great Weirwood in the distance. "It is beautiful," he murmured, "and terrible." Leaf nodded. "It drank the blood of a man to live." "Then the old pact is sealed," said the elder. "Blood for life, life for peace. But will men honor it this time?" She looked across the lake toward the lands beyond. "No," she said softly. "Not yet, but one day perhaps they will remember." The elder studied her for a moment longer, then bowed his head. "The forest owes you a debt, child. You have done what none before dared." Leaf smiled faintly. "I did only what the gods asked." He gave a slow nod. "And what will you do now?" "I will stay," she said, "until the gods speak again. Someone must guard the tree, lest men defile it." The others murmured among themselves, uneasy. To remain so close to the realm of men was to invite death. But the elder raised his hand. "Then we will remain with you. The isle shall be our refuge, and the heart tree our hope." So it was decided. The children of the forest built their homes among the roots and hollows of the isle, weaving branches into shelters and planting more pale trees along the water's edge. At night, they lit no fires, for the Weirwood's glow was enough to see by. They sang to the new heart tree, feeding its dreams with their own. Days passed, and the lake grew still again. The forest whispered with peace for the first time in many years. But the first men did not forget. Weeks after the battle, Morthal's surviving warriors reached their villages in the north. They spoke of strange lights upon the lake, of a pale tree that rose from the blood of the fallen, of voices in the water that called their names. Some said the gods of the forest had awoken to curse mankind. Others claimed a hero's spirit guarded the isle, forbidding men to set foot there again. Fear took root where swords had failed. None dared cross the lake. The Isle of Faces became a place of dread and reverence, both forbidden, sacred. Seasons turned. The first snows fell and melted. The Weirwood's leaves burned crimson even in winter's cold. The children tended to it in silence, knowing that men would come again one day. And they did. Years later, a band of first men approached the shore. They came not with fire and axes, but with open hands. Among them were old warriors, scarred and weary of endless war. They had heard the songs whispered by wind and water, songs of Serwyn, the man who had bled for peace. Leaf watched them from the edge of the isle as they knelt by the shore. One raised his hands to the trees and spoke solemnly. "We are tired of war," he said. "Let the gods judge us, and let the forest live." Leaf stepped forward then, her golden eyes gleaming in the pale light. The men recoiled at first, but she raised her hand. "The gods have heard," she said. "If you swear peace, the trees will remember." And so began the first true pact between men and the children of the forest, born not from fear, but from sacrifice. They swore upon the faces of the Weirwoods to live in harmony, to leave the sacred groves untouched. The old songs say that the gods themselves whispered approval through the rustling of the leaves. As the men departed, Leaf returned to the heart tree. Its face watched her still, serene and sorrowful. She laid her hand upon its bark and whispered, "Your blood was not spilled in vain, Serwyn of the stony shore." A single red leaf drifted down, brushing her cheek before it fell to the earth. She caught it and smiled faintly. "The forest remembers," she said again. And somewhere, deep within the roots of the new Weirwood, a heartbeat stirred, faint, but living still. The age of endless war had ended. For the first time, men and the children of the forest shared peace beneath the eyes of the old gods. But the gods are patient, and men are forgetful. The Weirwoods would stand for thousands of years, watching silently as peace gave way again to pride and blood. Yet, on that first dawn, with the mist curling around the isle and the red leaves whispering above, the world felt whole once more, and the memory of Serwyn's sacrifice was written into the very heart of Westeros. Long years passed upon the Isle of Faces. Seasons turned like the slow breathing of the earth. The heart tree flourished, its crimson leaves blazing even through the snows of winter, its roots sunk deep into the soil, rich with the blood of men. Around it, the children of the forest kept silent vigil. They whispered to the trees, sang to the waters, and dreamed in the shade of the weirwoods that now spread across the isle. Leaf in the Dew grew older in those years, though the children aged differently than men. Time flowed around them like a slow river. Her hair darkened to the color of deep moss. Her skin became as pale as birch bark, but her eyes still burned gold. Often she sat beneath the heart tree, listening to the wind move through its leaves. Sometimes, when the wind was right, she could hear Serwyn's voice in it. The forest remembers. And it did. The Isle of Faces became a sacred place, untouched by war. The first men built their halls beyond the rivers, while the children withdrew into the deep woods. For a time, there was peace. Men would come only to the lake's edge, offering sacrifices of grain and carved wood, never daring to set foot upon the isle itself. They called the pale tree the heart of the north and swore their oaths before its image. Yet peace, like summer, is a fleeting season. One autumn, many generations after the first pact, riders came from the south bearing tidings of unrest. The first men had begun to quarrel once more, over land, rivers, and the favor of their gods. The oaths sworn upon the Weirwoods were breaking like thin ice underfoot. Leaf watched this from afar, feeling the tremor of war returning to the soil. When men fought, the trees shuddered. When they killed, the roots drank their blood unwillingly. She went to speak with the eldest of her kin, Morn Rootbinder, who had seen more years than any other. He sat among the branches of a weirwood, his body half turned to bark, his fingers curling into roots. His eyes, still golden, opened as she approached. "The peace falters," Leaf said softly. "Men forget. They always do," Morn murmured, his voice a sigh through dry leaves. "Their lives burn too quickly. They build and they break, yet we remain. If they bring fire north again, the Weirwoods will burn," she warned. "Even this isle may not be spared." Morn's gaze drifted toward the heart tree, whose red leaves glowed in the dimming light. "Then we will call upon the power beneath its roots," he said. "The blood of Serwyn, the seed of the old gods. They will not abandon us, or they will demand more blood," Leaf said bitterly. The elder smiled faintly. "Blood is the price of peace. You know this better than any." That night, as mist crept once more across the lake, Leaf dreamt of Serwyn. He stood before her in the grove, his eyes gray as storm clouds, his sword gleaming faintly with red light. "They come again," he said. "Who?" "Men, always men. You gave them peace once, but peace is a fire they cannot keep lit." "What must I do?" she asked. His gaze drifted toward the heart tree. "Remember the pact. Protect it, even from them, especially from them." When she woke, the dawn was gray. The mist hung low upon the lake, and in its folds she saw shapes. Boats, dozens of them, gliding silently toward the Isle of Faces. Leaf rose to her feet and called out to her kin. "They come." The children gathered quickly, some armed with obsidian knives, others with slings and spears of bone. They hid among the trees, their small forms blending with the roots and shadows. From the lake came the sound of paddles striking water. Then, the first of the boats broke through the mist, long, narrow crafts carrying men in armor of bronze. Their banners bore the sigil of a crowned stag, black upon gold. They came ashore without a word. Their leader, a tall man with hair like pale straw. He strode forward, planting his sword in the earth before the heart tree. "I am King Torrhen Stoneheart," he said. "I come not for war, but to speak with the gods." Leaf stepped from the shadows. "The gods have little to say to those who break their oaths." The king turned, startled at the sight of her. "You are one of them, the forest's children." "I am," she said, "and this isle is sacred. No man may set foot here unbidden." Torrhen inclined his head slightly. "Then bid me welcome, for I mean no harm. My sons war against each other. My kingdom burns. I seek only counsel, how to end the bloodshed before it swallows us all." Leaf studied him. There was weariness in his eyes and truth in his words. "You would ask advice of the old gods? I would ask mercy," he replied. For a long moment, silence filled the grove. Then Leaf gestured toward the heart tree. "Kneel, king of men. Speak your heart, and the forest may answer." He did as she said. The king knelt before the great Weirwood, his hands pressed to the roots. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Old gods, hear me. I have lost my sons to pride and blood. My people tear each other apart. Give me wisdom to bind them again, or take my life in payment." The wind stirred, though no leaf moved. The face upon the tree seemed to shift, its carved eyes deepening with sorrow. A whisper drifted through the branches, faint but clear. To bind, there must first be breaking, blood for peace, again and again. Torrhen lifted his head. "Then take it," he said, drawing a knife from his belt. Before Leaf could stop him, he drove the blade into his own chest. The children cried out in horror. Blood poured over the roots, dark and steaming. The ground shuddered, and the leaves of the weirwood turned black for an instant before flushing crimson once more. Leaf knelt beside him as he fell. His eyes were wide, calm. "Tell them," he whispered, "that the king knelt, and the gods answered." He died with a faint smile. When the children looked again to the tree, its carved mouth had curved into something like a frown, or perhaps a sigh. The forest had accepted the offering, though its hunger was never sated. Leaf rose, her hands stained red. "Another man gives his life for peace," she said quietly. "But peace built on blood never lasts." And she was right. The death of Torrhen Stoneheart did end the wars for a time. His sons, shamed and fearful of the gods' wrath, laid down their arms and united their realms. Songs were sung of the king who gave his life upon the Isle of Faces. The Weirwoods were honored anew, and the pact was remembered once more. Yet the world beyond the lake changed. New kings rose, new banners flew, and new gods began to whisper across the narrow sea. The old gods grew silent again. On the isle, Leaf still kept her vigil. She watched the centuries pass, her heart heavy with knowledge. Every peace demanded blood, and every war began with forgetting. Still, she stayed, for such was her charge. At times, she would press her hand against the weirwood's bark and whisper, "Do you remember him? The man who planted you?" And sometimes, when the wind moved through the red leaves, she thought she heard a voice answer, faint and distant, but warm. Always. Then the forest would fall silent once more, waiting for the next turn of the wheel. Centuries passed like shadows across the lake, and the Isle of Faces endured, untouched by blade or fire. The weirwoods grew thick upon it, tall, solemn sentinels with pale trunks and leaves the color of blood. They whispered together when the wind passed through them, speaking in the tongue of roots and rivers, a speech only the children of the forest still understood. Leaf in the Dew remained as guardian, her body slow to age and her spirit bound to the isle. Time, which devoured empires, could not break her bond with the heart tree. Though her hair had turned white as snow and her voice had grown thin, she moved with the same quiet grace. At times, she thought herself the last of her kind, for no child had come from the deep woods in many years. The first men had multiplied and spread across Westeros. Their keeps rose of stone where forests once stood, and their swords gleamed where once had grown only moss and fern. They remembered the old gods in name, but not in truth. Some still prayed beneath the weirwoods, carving faces into the trunks, but few recalled the pact or the blood that had sealed it. Leaf saw it all through the eyes of the trees. She could feel their roots stretch across the lands, threading through the soil like veins through flesh. Through them, she saw the wars of kings and the ruin of oaths. The old gods watched as men forgot them, as they raised idols of new gods and built septs of marble where sacred groves had once stood. And yet, not all men turned away. One winter's night, when the moon hung cold and bright above the lake, Leaf sensed the stir of paddles in the water. She went to the shore and saw a small boat gliding toward the isle. At its prow sat a lone man wrapped in a gray cloak, his head bowed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried no torch, only a sword bound in leather and a bundle wrapped in cloth. When his boat struck the reeds, he stepped ashore without hesitation. The moment his boots touched the soil, the trees sighed as if recognizing him. Leaf appeared before him, her golden eyes faintly glowing in the moonlight. "Few men dare to come here unbidden," she said. "Speak your name." The man lifted his hood. His face was lined and weary, his beard touched with frost. "I am Harlan Reed, of the marshes of the Neck. My kin remember the pact, though others forget. I come seeking counsel." "Counsel is given to those who listen," said Leaf. "Why have you come?" He unwrapped the bundle he carried. Inside lay a child, a girl no more than 10 years old, her skin pale as the moon, her eyes closed as if in sleep. "My daughter," he said softly. "She dreams of the trees. She speaks in tongues not taught by man. The masters call it madness. I call it the voice of the old gods." Leaf stepped closer. The girl's chest rose and fell faintly. Her breath came shallow, but her face was peaceful. "She has the gift," Leaf murmured, "the sight that once belonged to the Greenseers." "Can you heal her?" Harlan asked. "Perhaps," said Leaf, "but healing comes with a price." He bowed his head. "I am ready to pay it." Leaf led him into the heart of the isle. The great weirwood stood there as it always had, its red leaves whispering in the cold wind. Beneath its roots lay the soil rich with Serwyn's blood, the place where life and death had once entwined. "Lay her here," Leaf said, "and speak no word until the wind answers." Harlan obeyed, placing his daughter upon the ground before the tree. Her small hands lay folded upon her chest, her hair spread like silver on the dark earth. Leaf knelt beside her and touched her brow. "Child of man, child of dream," she whispered. "The forest calls. Do you answer?" The wind rose. The leaves of the weirwood rustled, and the carved face upon its trunk seemed to stir. The air thickened with power. The girl's eyelids fluttered and her lips parted in a faint murmur. "She hears them," Leaf said softly. "What do they say?" Harlan whispered. Nothing that men can bear to know. The wind died suddenly, and for a moment all was still. Then the girl's eyes opened, not brown nor blue, but pale green shot through with silver. She looked around as though seeing the world for the first time. "Father," she whispered, "the trees are singing." Harlan dropped to his knees, tears shining in his eyes. "She lives," he breathed. Leaf looked upon the child and knew what the old gods had done. The girl's life had been returned, but not untouched. Her gaze held the weight of ages, the distant sorrow of the earth itself. She would dream the dreams of trees, see through the eyes of roots and ravens. "She is bound now," Leaf said quietly. "Her blood carries the gift and the curse. She will hear the forest until her last breath." "I thank you," said Harlan. "Whatever the cost, I accept it." Leaf studied him a moment. "Go then, and guard her well. Teach her the old ways. Tell your kin that the gods still watch, though they sleep." He bowed deeply. "I will." As he turned to leave, the girl looked back at Leaf. "Who are you?" Leaf smiled faintly. "A friend of the forest. Remember me when the world grows loud." The boat slipped once more into the mist, carrying them away. For many years after, Leaf watched the child through the eyes of the trees. She grew into a woman wise beyond her years, known among her people as a dreamer and seer. Her descendants carried the gift still, the blood of green seers, the power to walk the past and future through the roots of the Weirwoods. So the old gods found their voice again in mortal blood. Yet even as this small light kindled in the world, darkness gathered in the south. New peoples came across the sea, the Andals, tall and pale, bearing swords of steel and the seven-pointed star of their faith. They burned the heart trees wherever they landed, calling them idols of false gods. The children fled northward, and the old ways died beneath flame and hammer. From the Isle, Leaf felt their suffering through every root and branch. The screams of burning trees filled her dreams. She stood beneath the heart tree and cried, "Must it all burn? Did Serwyn's blood fall for nothing?" The face upon the Weirwood said nothing. Its eyes, carved deep and red, seemed to glisten like tears. The Andal's fire spread across Westeros. Kingdom after kingdom fell. Only in the far north did the Weirwoods still stand untouched, for the warriors there held fast to the faith of the old gods. They spoke of the Isle of Faces as the holiest of places, where no man might go unpunished. And so, even as the children were driven to the edge of the world, the Isle remained inviolate, shielded by the power born of sacrifice and sorrow. Leaf in the Dew walked its paths alone, listening to the echoes of all that had been lost. She no longer saw her kin in the woods, no longer heard laughter among the roots. Only the wind and the sighing of leaves kept her company. Yet she did not despair. The trees endured, and through them, so did she. At times, she would lay her hand upon the heart tree's trunk and whisper, "Serwyn, wherever your spirit drifts, look upon what your blood has made. The forest still remembers." And the leaves, crimson in the moonlight, would stir as if answering her prayer. The Weirwoods waited, patient as stone, eternal as grief, for the day men would remember once more what they owed to the gods that watched them through carved and bleeding eyes. The world beyond the Isle grew harder, colder, and louder with the march of centuries. The Andals spread across Westeros like a tide that never ebbed, their steel blades glinting beneath the sun, their seven-pointed stars raised where the faces of Weirwoods once gazed. Kingdoms rose and fell, but the Isle of Faces endured, untouched, veiled always in mist. Its shores were said to be guarded by ghosts, by spirits of the old gods who devoured any man who dared to cross. The truth was quieter and sadder. The isle needed no guardian now. The mists themselves seemed to obey the will of the heart tree, curling thick around the waters and confusing any who tried to approach. Leaf in the dew remained, the last child of the forest upon that sacred ground. Her kin had fled far north, beyond the wall of ice and wind, or into the caves of forgotten hills. She had not seen another of her kind in an age, and though the years touched her lightly, even she could feel their weight now. Her golden eyes had dimmed, her hair hung long and white as the snow that sometimes dusted the branches of the weirwoods. Still, she walked each dawn among the trees, whispering to them, singing in the tongue of her people, so that they would remember the songs that men had forgotten. It was during such a morning that she heard the sound of oars again. She stopped, listening. The lake was hidden beneath a pale fog, but the faint, rhythmic splash of wood on water came steady and true. For the first time in many centuries, a mortal dared the mists. Leaf moved silently through the trees to the island's edge. The fog parted just enough for her to see. A small boat, crude but strong, drifting toward the shore. In it sat a single man wrapped in a rough-spun cloak, his beard black, his hands scarred. His eyes, sharp as flint, scanned the mist as if it were a living thing. When the boat struck the reeds, he stepped onto the shore, planting a spear in the mud beside him. He did not tremble, though the air grew heavy and cold around him. Leaf stepped forward, her bare feet making no sound on the wet ground. "Few dare the mists," she said softly. "Fewer still live to cross them." The man turned, and for an instant there was fear in his eyes. Fear swiftly swallowed by wonder. "You're one of them," he said, "a child of the forest." "I am what remains," she replied. "And you, man of stone and blood, why come here?" He knelt, resting one hand upon the earth. "My name is Idrun Stark of the North. I come not to steal nor burn. I come to remember." Leaf tilted her head, studying him. The name meant something to her, old as the roots beneath her feet. She had heard it whispered in the winds that passed through the Weirwoods. "The Starks of Winterfell," she murmured. "The wolves of the north who kept the faith when all others forgot." Edrin nodded. "My fathers prayed to the old gods as I do, yet their voices grow faint. The Meisters call them dead. I would know if they still hear us." Leaf looked toward the heart tree that towered in the isle's center. "The gods hear, but they seldom answer." "Then I'll wait until they do," said Edrin, his voice firm. Leaf regarded him for a long moment, then turned and motioned for him to follow. "Come, Wolf of Winterfell. If you would hear the gods, you must go where men have not gone in 1,000 years." She led him through the grove, past trees whose carved faces watched from shadow and moonlight both. The air grew thick with the scent of sap and earth. Edrin felt as though he walked through a living dream, every step weighed with the presence of unseen eyes. At last they reached the heart tree. Its trunk rose wider than any hall, its red leaves whispering in voices too faint for mortal ears. The face carved there was neither gentle nor cruel. It simply was, ageless and endless. Edrin fell to his knees before it. "Old gods," he said, his voice breaking, "we have kept your ways, though the world forgets. Tell me, do you still know your children?" Leaf stood behind him in silence. Then the wind began to stir. The leaves shivered. Somewhere in the depths of the island, a low hum rose, deep as thunder beneath the earth. The roots of the heart tree shifted. Edrin gasped as he felt something move beneath his palms, slow, immense, alive. His mind filled with visions, forests burning, snow falling on endless plains, faces carved in white wood watching as empires turned to dust, and through it all, a voice, distant, echoing through time. "We remember." He staggered back, breathing hard. "They spoke," he whispered. "They spoke." Leaf's expression was calm, though her eyes shone with something like sadness. "You asked if they still knew their children. Now you have your answer." Edrin bowed his head. "Then I must tell the North. They must know the old gods live still." "They live," Leaf said, "but they are not kind. Tell your kin to honor them with truth, not pride. The gods remember all. The mercy of Serwyn, the cruelty of kings, the blood of those who broke the pact. Their roots are long, their memory longer." Edrin rose to his feet. "I will tell them," he promised. "I swear it by the heart of Winterfell itself." Leaf smiled faintly. "Then perhaps the North will endure, even as the world burns around it." Before he left, she gave him a single crimson leaf from the heart tree. "Carry this to your home," she said. "When you pray before your own Weirwood, burn it. The smoke will bind your gods to this one, and their eyes will open once more." Edrin took it reverently. "You have my thanks, Old One." As his boat slipped again into the mist, Leaf watched until he vanished from sight. For the first time in many lifetimes, she felt a glimmer of hope, that the memory of the pact, of Serwyn, of the first Weirwood, might yet survive. In the years that followed, word spread through the North of a Stark who had spoken with the gods. Some called him Edrin the Dreamer. Others said he had gone mad from seeing too much. Yet his kin kept the faith, building their castle around a grove of heart trees and swearing their oaths before their red leaves. And so the memory endured. But beyond the wall, cold winds were rising. Leaf could feel it through the roots, through the frozen veins of the world itself. An old power stirred, not of the trees, but of ice and shadow. She remembered whispers from the dawn of days, when the gods themselves had warred with the cold ones who walked without breath. "The long night comes again," she murmured, laying her hand upon the Weirwood's bark. "And still men sleep." The wind answered with a sigh, the leaves whispering like voices of the dead. Leaf turned her gaze northward, toward the unseen lands beyond the wall. "If they come once more," she said softly, "the forest must wake, or all will fall to darkness." The red leaves trembled. A single one drifted down, landing at her feet. She picked it up and pressed it to her heart. "The forest remembers," she whispered again, "and it will not sleep forever." Above her, the face of the first Weirwood seemed to smile, not in joy, but in promise. The winds of the north grew colder as the centuries wheeled onward. They came howling over the forests and fens, carrying the taste of snow even in summer. In those long winters that never seemed to end, men spoke in whispers of strange sights beyond the wall, white shadows walking where no man dared tread, and cold fires burning in the night. Leaf in the Dew felt it through the roots long before the tales reached the south. The ground beneath the Isle of Faces trembled with distant chill. The Weirwoods groaned as if in pain. At times, when she touched the bark of the heart tree, she felt frost under her fingers, frost deep within living wood. "The cold comes again," she murmured. "The war of dawn is not done." Her voice was small in the vast quiet of the isle. Few living things now moved beneath the red leaves. The birds no longer sang, and the mists that cloaked the lake never lifted. The isle had become a realm of ghosts, the breath of the old gods alone stirring its still air. Yet one night, the silence broke. A storm rose from the north, black as pitch and wild with lightning. The lake churned, and the mists twisted into monstrous shapes. Leaf took shelter beneath the heart tree, her cloak whipping around her like wings of shadow. But even as she crouched among the roots, she felt a presence approach, a cold older than time itself, seeping through the air. Then she saw it. Across the lake, through the lightning-lit fog, came figures, tall, pale shapes gliding over the water, leaving no ripple in their wake. Their eyes gleamed with blue fire, colder than death. The others had come south again, their numbers few but their purpose clear. Leaf felt her heart falter. The last time she had seen their kind was in the age before men had names, when the sun itself had seemed to flee their coming. They had been driven back then, bound in frost and darkness. How could they walk again? The answer whispered through the roots. Because men forgot. The first of the white shadows stepped onto the isle. Frost spread beneath its feet, creeping across the grass and stones. It wore no armor of man, no helm or crown, only ice and silence. Yet Leaf knew it for what it was, a messenger of the great winter, the vengeance of the forgotten cold. "Why come you here?" she cried, her voice shaking the leaves. "This isle is sacred, bound by blood and fire both." The creature's head turned toward her, slow as the turning of a glacier. When it spoke, its voice was the crack of ice breaking on stone. "All gods die, even yours." The trees groaned around them. The Weirwood's carved faces wept red tears as frost climbed their trunks. Leaf spread her arms wide, calling upon the power that still slept within the heart tree. "Then you shall not pass," she shouted. "This is the god's ground." The thing moved toward her, its sword of frozen crystal gleaming like moonlight on snow. The air around it froze solid. Leaves shattered in the wind like shards of glass. Leaf pressed her hands to the roots, crying words of the old tongue, words older than flame. "Blood of man, sap of tree, rise and bind." The ground heaved. The roots of the heart tree tore free, writhing like serpents. They lashed at the creature, curling around its legs and arms, dragging it backward. Frost bit deep into the wood, but the roots held fast. The White Walker raised its sword high and struck. The blade cut through one of the great roots, freezing it solid, shattering it with a sound like breaking stone. But the others only tightened their grip, pulling it toward the trunk. Leaf felt the strain tear through her body. Her skin cracked. Her breath came ragged, but she did not let go. "You shall not unmake what was made in blood," she cried. The heart tree flared with light, not red now, but white as winter's heart. The creature screamed, a sound that split the night, and for a moment the air burned with brilliance. When the light faded, it was gone, leaving only frost and silence behind. Leaf fell to her knees. Her hands were numb, her breath white in the air. She could feel the frost crawling through her veins, the price of what she had done. Yet the isle was safe, for now. The heart tree's face seemed to look down upon her. Its eyes wept red once more, the sap running warm over her hands. She pressed her forehead to the bark. "I have held them back," she whispered, "but not for long." Through the roots came a faint whisper, a memory, a voice she had not heard in an age. "Serwyn." "Not for long," his voice echoed, soft as falling snow. "But long enough." Leaf smiled weakly. "Then we shall endure again, old friend." The frost upon the isle melted slowly as the storm passed, yet the air never truly warmed. From that night onward, a faint cold lingered among the trees, a reminder of the war that had not yet come, but would. In the years that followed, men in the north spoke of dreams, of white shadows glimpsed in the snows, of cold whispers in the woods. The Starks built their walls high and kept their fires burning. Their old gods watched from their red-faced trees, silent and solemn. Leaf saw all of it through the Weirwood's eyes. She saw kingdoms rise and fall, the Andals kneeling to their septons, the dragons of Valyria sweeping from the east, burning towns and forests alike. She watched the first men kneel before new conquerors, their gods fading to whispers in hollow groves. And yet, through all the blood and fire, the North remained. The wolves still preyed beneath the red leaves. The pact still lived in their hearts, though they no longer knew its full tale. On the Isle, Leaf felt the strength of the heart tree waning. The world grew loud with men's voices, drowning out the quiet songs of roots and wind. She wondered if the time had come to pass into the earth herself, to join the gods beneath the soil. But then she heard a cry, faint, distant, carried on the wind. A newborn's wail, sharp as the call of a raven. The sound came not from the Isle, but from the north, yet through the Weirwood's deep roots, Leaf felt it. A new life, bound by old blood, the blood of Serwyn, the blood of the pact. The line endures, she whispered. The forests will move still in mortal veins. She rose once more, though her limbs trembled. Then I will not fade. Not yet. She laid her hand upon the heart tree. Its leaves trembled, whispering back to her. The frost upon the bark began to thaw, dripping like tears. Wake them when the cold returns, she murmured. Wake the wolves and let them remember. Far to the north, snow fell upon a newborn child in a castle of stone. The Weirwoods watched in silence as the wheel turned again, as blood and roots prepared to weave their fates once more. And on the Isle of Faces, the first Weirwood stood tall, its red leaves shining against the gray sky, its ancient face calm and knowing. Beneath it, the last child of the forest whispered to the sleeping gods, "The forest remembers, and so shall the world." The moon was thin as a blade when the mists of the lake thickened once more. Ages had passed since the storm that brought the white shadows to the Isle, yet the memory of that night clung to the Weirwoods like frost. The roots still whispered of it beneath the soil, where the blood of Serwyn mingled with the sap of the gods. The Isle of Faces remained veiled and silent, untouched by man or time. Leaf in the Dew no longer walked swiftly as she once had. Her limbs had grown thin, her voice quieter than the wind, but her eyes still burned with that same gold flame. She no longer counted the passing years. The world beyond the lake had changed too often, and men's names were like smoke. Here, gone, forgotten. Yet through the Weirwood's roots she still heard the pulse of life across Westeros. She saw the rise of the dragon lords, their beasts darkening the skies, their fire devouring even stone. She felt the shudder when the first Targaryen set foot upon the western shore and claimed to unite the Seven Kingdoms with blood and flame. The trees recoiled at the taste of burning wood and charred bone. Fire, the old enemy of the forest, had returned to rule. From the heart tree, she watched as the dragons soared over the north, and she listened when the men of Winterfell knelt and swore their fealty to a foreign king. But the old gods were patient. They had seen conquerors before. Fire would burn bright and die. Roots endured. Still, Leaf feared for the silence that grew within the trees. Many of the heartwoods had been cut down, their faces lost, their voices fading from the earth. Only in the north and upon the Isle did they still whisper in full tongue. At times she wondered if even the gods could die when their children ceased to speak their names. One night, when the sky was deep and black and the stars flickered like cold embers. She felt the call of the roots again, not from the north, but from across the narrow sea of time and memory. The old power stirred in the deep, restless, uneasy. And then she saw him. Through the eyes of a far-off Weirwood, she beheld a boy kneeling before its face, a boy with dark hair and gray eyes, and the mark of wolves upon his blood. He prayed not for power or victory, but for understanding. She felt the truth of him in the way the roots stirred. This one bore the echo of Serwyn, though the name was long lost to men. "He is of the line," she whispered. "The blood remembers." The boy's voice rose through the ages in the trees. "Tell me what you are," he asked of the gods. "Tell me why we dream." Leaf closed her eyes. "Because you were never meant to forget." She felt the Weirwood's response travel through root and soil, a slow pulse that reached from Winterfell's Godswood to the Isle of Faces. The trees spoke to one another in silence, and through them, Leaf heard the echoes of prophecy. The cold in the far north was stirring again, the same shadow she had held at bay so long ago. "The long night will come once more," she murmured to the heart tree. And still, men do not listen. The wind rose among the leaves, and she heard a faint reply, the voice of the Weirwood itself, older than any tongue. Then they must be made to remember. Leaf bowed her head. "Then I shall do what I can." She gathered from the roots a handful of red leaves that had fallen from the heart tree, each veined with traces of white sap. She bound them together with her hair and laid them upon the earth. "Let the wind carry these where they must go," she said. "Let memory find the blood that was promised." The air stirred, and the leaves rose, spinning upward into the mist like crimson sparks. They vanished into the night, borne by the breath of the old gods. For many days after, Leaf felt the stir of power running through the roots. Across Westeros, dreams began to come to certain men and women. Dreams of a pale isle and a bleeding tree, of faces carved in living wood, of whispers that promised the return of something long buried. In Winterfell, a Stark lord woke screaming in the night. In the Eyrie, a young girl cried that the trees were watching her. In the swamps of the Neck, the reeds dreamed of a woman with golden eyes, weeping beneath red leaves. The forest was waking. But not all dreams were kind. In the far north, beyond the wall, the cold things stirred again. Leaf saw them through the frozen eyes of ancient pines, the white shadows gathering in silence, their numbers growing as winter's breath deepened. "Again," she whispered, fear and sorrow mingling in her voice. "Always again." The isle itself seemed to shiver. The mists thickened, swirling in unnatural patterns. The heart tree's leaves began to fall faster, their red rain carpeting the ground like blood. Leaf went to her knees beneath its branches. "Old gods, tell me what to do," she pleaded. "I have guarded this isle longer than memory, but I am alone. The children are gone, the men forget. If the winter comes again, who will stand?" The face in the tree wept a slow line of sap, glistening red in the moonlight. Through the roots came the faintest whisper, "You will not stand alone." And then she felt it, a presence vast and distant, yet bound to her by blood and tree alike. Somewhere far to the north, the boy of wolf's blood looked through the eyes of a Weirwood and saw her. For a heartbeat, they were joined, past and present, man and child of the forest. He did not know her name, nor she his, yet they were bound. Through him, the gods had chosen their champion. Leaf smiled, tears running down her withered cheeks. "Then it begins again," she whispered. The last seed has woken. The wind rose, and the lake stirred. Somewhere in the darkness, a raven cried 3 times, and its echo carried across the mist like prophecy. Leaf sat beside the heart tree, her strength failing, her body growing heavy with age and memory. "I have done what I could," she murmured. "Now let the blood of men bear the burden of gods." The weirwoods around her sighed as if in mourning. Their faces glowed faintly red, and the roots curled gently around her. She leaned back against the trunk, her golden eyes closing for the last time. As she breathed her final breath, the heart tree's bark split where her body touched it, and the roots drew her gently in. Her skin became pale as the wood, her hair turned the color of red leaves, and her spirit sank into the dream beneath the roots. The last child of the forest was gone, yet upon the Isle of Faces, her voice did not fade. The rustle of leaves still carried her whispers. The forest remembers, the pact endures, the blood returns. And far to the north, in a castle of stone and snow, a young Stark dreamt that night of a woman with golden eyes, standing beneath a weeping tree. She spoke his name, though he had never heard it before. When he woke, he could still feel the chill of mist on his skin, and in his heart, something ancient stirred, something vast and waiting. The gods were not silent anymore. The seasons turned, slow and relentless, as they always had. But now winter lingered longer than it should. Across Westeros, snows fell before their time. Rivers froze, and nights seemed to stretch further into day. The small folk muttered that the gods had turned their faces away, but the old gods had never turned. They watched, they waited, and on the Isle of Faces, where no man dared set foot, the weirwoods still whispered beneath their crimson leaves. The heart tree stood silent, its face calm and eternal, but its roots pulsed faintly with life. The faint echo of Leaf in the Dew, whose body had become part of the island she had guarded. Through those roots, her spirit still listened to the songs of the world. She dreamed of snow. Through the deep veins of the forest, she saw it, the white desolation stretching across the north, the creeping of the cold ones in shadow. Their pale hands brushed the trees, leaving frost that bit to the core. And yet, through the weirwood's eyes, she also saw another vision, a young man with the blood of wolves in his veins, his face solemn, his eyes gray and searching. He knelt before a heart tree, his sword planted in the earth. Snow fell upon his shoulders, but he did not move. "Old gods," he whispered, "if you hear me, give me strength." Leaf's voice stirred faintly through the roots. "You have it, child of the north. You are our memory." The young man's head lifted slightly, as if he had heard something. A wind moved through the grove, though the air was still. The leaves trembled and whispered his name, a name he would one day make great, though his birth was shrouded in mystery. Then Leaf's vision faded, and she returned to the quiet of the isle. She did not sleep often now. Sleep was too close to the death that had already claimed her body. Instead, she listened. The weirwoods spoke endlessly, of wars waged and lost, of kings crowned and slain, of men who prayed for mercy they did not deserve. Their voices reached her like waves upon a shore, each carrying fragments of sorrow, pride, and longing. One night, the wind carried something different, not prayer, not blood, but song. It came from across the lake, faint at first, then clear. A voice, human yet soft, sang an old tune in the language of the first men. The words were ones Leaf had not heard in 1,000 years. A hymn to the trees, a plea for peace between wood and flesh. She felt her spirit stir. Who dares sing the songs of the pact? The mist parted, and upon the far shore stood a figure holding a torch. The singer was a woman, cloaked in gray furs, her hair long and dark as night. At her feet stood a small boat, its prow shaped like a wolf's head. She knelt before the lake and set the torch down in the water. The flame hissed and died, but the glow of it lingered beneath the surface, spreading like red fire through the mist. "Old gods," the woman called, her voice strong. "I am Lyanna of the North. I come not for favor nor glory, but to keep my word. My son will bear your name, and your blood shall flow again in mortal veins." Leaf's spirit shuddered within the heart tree. The name carried power. She could feel it, a thread that bound this woman to the wolves, to Serwyn, to the long line of those who had knelt beneath the red leaves. Then came another sound, the wailing of a child. Lyanna bent over the small bundle in her arms, her tears falling freely. "He is yours," she whispered. "Let him live, even if the world forgets who he is." Leaf's presence spread outward through the roots beneath the lake. A child born of ice and fire, she thought. Old blood mingled with new. Perhaps this is what the gods have awaited. The Weirwoods across the north trembled. The pact that had once been sealed in blood and sap stirred again, faint but alive. Leaf felt it like the rising of the sun after a long night. Then the mist thickened, swallowing the shore. When it cleared, the woman was gone. The flame had vanished beneath the water, leaving only ripples that lapped softly against the isle's stones. The lake fell silent once more. Years passed and winter deepened. Across the land, whispers grew of the dead walking, of frozen horrors stirring in the far north. The wall stood tall still, but its ancient magics were weakening, its strength frayed by centuries of neglect. Leaf felt it all. The frost crept once more through the roots, reaching even the heart tree's core. But this time, it did not bring despair. It brought awakening. The forest had slept too long. In the depths of the tree, her spirit stirred and spoke to the others. "Rise," she whispered. "The long night comes again. The time of reckoning returns." From every corner of Westeros, the Weirwoods answered. In the north, their red leaves shivered though no wind blew. In the riverlands, faces carved long ago wept fresh tears of sap. Even in the ruins of old castles, roots cracked stone as the godswood stirred from slumber. Through them, the earth remembered what it had been made to forget. Far to the north, the boy, now a man grown, stood before another heart tree. The wind howled through the branches, carrying whispers only he could hear. His eyes were closed, but his mind was open. Leaf reached to him through the web of roots, her voice soft as falling snow. "Do you hear them?" He frowned, shivering. "Who speaks?" "The forest, the blood, the gods that never died." He fell to one knee, clutching his chest. "Why me?" "Because you are the memory," she said. "And what was forgotten must be remembered before the end." Visions flooded his mind. The Isle of Faces bathed in mist, the heart tree gleaming pale against the night. A woman with eyes of gold and tears of sap upon her cheeks. He saw armies of the dead marching south, and the cold fire spreading like disease. And beneath it all, he heard the same words, again and again. "The forest remembers." When he awoke, he found himself kneeling before the Weirwood, his sword buried in the earth. The snow had stopped falling, and the air was very still. He rose, his breath white in the cold. He did not yet understand the vision, nor the voice that spoke through the trees, but he knew its truth. The old gods were not gone. They were waiting. Back upon the isle, Leaf's spirit sank deeper into the roots, her strength waning but her will unbroken. She had seen what she needed to see. The line of Cerwyn endured. The blood of the pact yet flowed. Now, she whispered into the heart of the earth, the forest must keep faith with man once more. The Weirwood's leaves rustled like distant applause, and the face of the heart tree seemed to smile in the moonlight. Winter might claim the world again, but the gods would not go quietly into the dark. For the first Weirwood still stood, its roots deep in the bones of the earth, its red leaves burning bright against the endless snow, a living memory of the day when man and forest had bled together and bound the world in peace. And somewhere beyond the mists where dreams and waking met, the whisper came again, soft but unyielding. The forest remembers, always. The world was changing again. The air itself had grown thin and sharp, and the winds that swept over the north no longer carried the scent of pine or rain, but of snow and death. The long night was returning. The old songs had warned of it, though men had laughed at such tales for centuries. But now the laughter had died, the dead walked, and the cold followed. In the deep heart of the Isle of Faces, where no living man had walked in an age, the Weirwoods shivered. Their crimson leaves trembled against a wind that did not stir the lake beyond. The mists around the island thickened, turning the moon to a dim red glow. Beneath the roots of the great heart tree, Leaf's spirit stirred from its long silence. She had been part of the tree for countless years now, no longer flesh, but voice and will. A whisper carried through roots and leaves. Her golden eyes, once bright, had turned to sap, yet they still saw. She had watched the world's endless turning, from the fall of kings to the birth of dragons, but never had she felt the land so full of dread as now. The cold beneath the wall was rising again, the same cold she had faced alone when the first Weirwood took root. She felt it spreading like poison through the veins of the earth, reaching even her island. The lake's surface crusted with frost, and the mists froze in place like glass. Leaf gathered her strength and called through the roots. "Old ones, awake. The night we feared has come again." The Weirwoods answered with a sigh that rippled through their leaves. Far away, trees in forgotten groves shuddered, their carved faces weeping sap. In the godswoods of the north, snow fell softly upon crimson leaves. Through every heart tree, the whisper moved like a storm beginning to rise. We remember. We wake. Leaf felt their power stir, slow, ancient, terrible in its patience. She reached further, across rivers and mountains, until her voice touched the Weirwood in Winterfell. There, before its face, stood the same man she had seen in visions. A Stark, cloaked in black, his eyes gray as steel. His sword was dark and unadorned, his breath misting in the frozen air. She could see the weight of his heart, the sorrow and duty that bound him. "Child of the wolf," she whispered through the roots. "Hear me." His head lifted slightly, though he heard nothing but the rustle of the wind. Still, something within him stirred, the faint memory of dreams he could not name. "The world darkens," Leaf said. "The dead walk, and the forest cannot fight alone. You must remember the pact." Visions filled her mind as she spoke, of Cerwyn bleeding beneath the heart tree, of Leaf herself pressing her hand into the earth, of the first seed taking root, the bond of man and forest, life and death, bound in blood and faith. That bond had been forgotten. It must be renewed. Through the heart trees of the north, her message spread. To every Stark, every Reed, every soul who still prayed to the old gods, came dreams of the Isle, of mists and red leaves, of faces watching through white bark. Some woke trembling, some wept, and others prayed. The old gods were not silent now, but the dead were faster than prayers. Beyond the wall, armies of ice swept southward, and with them came cold that even fire could not break. Leaf felt their passing through the roots. Wherever they walked, trees cracked and fell silent. Their frost reached the bones of the world. On the Isle, she felt the lake begin to freeze. The mists stiffened into crystal. From the dark water, cracks spread outward, glittering like spiderwebs of ice. For the first time since Serwyn's sacrifice, the Isle of Faces felt the touch of true winter. Leaf reached into the heart tree's roots, drawing upon every drop of power that still lived there. "Not again," she said aloud, her voice echoing like the sigh of wind through branches. "I will not let this place fall." The ground trembled. The roots of the Weirwoods twisted and rose, coiling together beneath the frozen earth. A faint red glow spread from the heart tree's base, pulsing like blood. The ice halted at the edge of the shore, hissing as if in pain, but the power she drew upon came at a cost. She could feel herself weakening, her spirit stretching thin across the roots of the island. "If this is my last breath," she murmured, "let it hold until the wolves come." Far away, in the north, the wolf-blooded man knelt before his weirwood. He felt the pulse beneath his hands. Faint, warm, alive. His dreams had grown stronger of late, filled with visions of a weeping tree and a woman with golden eyes. That night, as he slept, her voice came clearer than ever. "The Isle waits," she said. "The pact must be renewed, or the world will drown in ice." He woke before dawn, his decision made. Leaf felt him move, felt his steps through the snow and the forest, each one shaking the web of roots that bound them. Others would follow him in time, men and women chosen not by crowns but by blood. The wolves, the reeds, the few who still prayed beneath red leaves. She smiled, though she no longer had lips to smile with. So it begins again. The lake began to thaw as the first light of morning touched the water. The frost on the mists melted into silver threads, and the crimson leaves glistened in the pale sun. Leaf drew her spirit deeper into the heart tree, letting the roots hold her steady. "I will wait," she said softly. "I will wait for the wolves." And wait she did. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. Each dawn brought a faint warmth that soon faded to chill again. But at last, one morning, she felt it, the touch of human hands upon the lake's edge. Men had come to the Isle. They came in silence, bearing no swords, only torches and carved totems of the old gods. Among them was the Stark she had seen, and others whose eyes carried the same ancient memory. They crossed the misted water, their reflections rippling like ghosts. When they reached the Isle, they knelt before the heart tree. None spoke. The silence was sacred. Leaf felt their presence like sunlight through old bark. She gathered what strength remained and whispered through the leaves, "Remember." The man raised his head. His gray eyes met the face in the tree. "We remember," he said. "We came to swear again." He drew a knife and cut his palm, letting his blood fall upon the roots. One by one, the others did the same. The soil drank deeply, and the Weirwood's leaves stirred. Though no wind blew, red light spread from the tree's base, faint at first, then bright as dawn. Leaf's spirit rose through the branches, her voice joining the wind, the water, the blood. Blood for peace, flesh for faith, the pact renewed. The light faded slowly. When the men stood again, The world seemed still, as if all of Westeros had paused to listen. The old gods were awake. The Isle of Faces breathed once more. The Stark looked upon the heart tree and whispered, "May we be worthy." Leaf's voice came faintly in reply, carried on the sighing of the leaves. "Be true, and the forest will stand with you." As the men left the isle and the mists closed behind them, the heart tree's face seemed to soften. The Weirwoods no longer wept but smiled, the calm smile of those who have seen the world reborn and know it will endure. And beneath its roots, Leaf's spirit finally rested, her duty fulfilled. Yet her last thought lingered like a whisper through the trees. The forest remembers, always. The wolves returned to the north with the weight of oaths heavy upon them. Though the men who had crossed the lake spoke little of what they had seen, something in their eyes told of things beyond mortal ken. They had seen the Isle of Faces, not as rumor, but in truth. They had heard the old gods stir, had felt their gaze like cold fire upon their souls. From that day forward, the Starks of Winterfell were changed. They built their faith not upon words, but silence. When they prayed, they did so in the stillness of the godswood, as if fearing that to speak might wake something sleeping beneath the roots. And sleeping it was, but dreaming too. Deep beneath the isle, beneath the red leaves and white trunks, beneath even the bones of the first pact, the power of the Weirwood spread. The blood spilled by Serwyn and by the wolves' descendants had soaked through the soil and joined the old sap in a union that could not be broken. From those roots, the land itself remembered. Through the Weirwoods, Leaf's last breath moved still, no longer a voice, but a pulse, a rhythm like the heartbeat of the world. It whispered to the earth, to the rivers, to the trees that men had forgotten were alive. It spoke of oaths and endings, of blood and frost, of the endless turning of all things. And the world listened. The cold that had risen in the far north began to meet its answer in the hearts of men. The wolves gathered, their dreams touched by visions of snow and red leaves. Among them walked the man who bore the mark of two worlds, born of fire and ice, yet bound by the forest's will. The gods had chosen their instrument. In his dreams, he walked the isle. The mists parted for him, though no boat carried him there. The Weirwoods bowed their branches as he passed, and the heart tree waited for him, its eyes weeping crimson light. From its roots rose the shape of a woman with hair of white and gold, her skin pale as birch, her gaze calm and sorrowful. "Who are you?" he asked her. "I am the first watcher," she said, "the voice of the forest, the blood that remembers." "Why do I see you?" "Because the world is ending," she said simply. "The dead have come again, and the living have forgotten what must be done. You carry both their gifts, the warmth that kindles and the cold that endures. But alone, you will fail. Fire burns too quickly, and ice sleeps too long." He frowned, his hand upon his sword. "Then what hope is there?" Leaf raised her eyes to the branches above them. "The same hope that was born in the first war, blood willingly given, a sacrifice that binds what is broken. The gods do not ask for war, they ask for remembrance." He turned to look upon the heart tree. "And if I refuse? Then the world will drown in ice and shadow, and all will forget that we ever were." The wind stirred, and the vision faded, but her words clung to him like frost upon steel. When he woke, he was no longer the same man. The old gods had marked him, as once they had marked Serwyn before him. Far away, on the isle, the forest began to stir anew. The roots grew restless, their pale tips pushing through the soil like searching fingers. The mists swirled faster, and the lake's surface rippled, though no wind touched it. The heart tree glowed faintly red, as though the blood of the first pact had begun to flow again. Through that slow awakening, Leaf's spirit watched the world one last time. She saw the men of the Night's Watch standing their final vigil upon the wall, black cloaks snapping in the wind. She saw the great white fields of the north crawling with shapes that should not walk. She saw dragons rising from smoke and ash, their fire alight against the endless night. And she saw the wolves, one in the north, one far to the south, both bound by dreams and destiny neither could yet name. "The wheel turns again," she whispered through the roots. "Fire and ice, blood and bone, the gods remember." The heart tree's eyes flickered, and a low hum filled the air. From its branches fell a rain of red leaves, drifting over the island and onto the lake beyond. Each leaf bore the faint trace of a face, some sad, some fierce, all watching. As they touched the water, ripples spread outward, carrying the forest's memory into every stream and river that wound its way across Westeros. Men who drank from those rivers would dream of red leaves and weeping trees. Some would wake screaming, others would kneel and pray. The old gods were whispering again, though few understood their words. The dead pressed ever southward. Their coming chilled the bones of the world. Towns fell silent, their hearths cold. The walls shuddered beneath the weight of an ancient evil that had never truly been defeated. And through it all, the isle waited. No man set foot there now. No oar disturbed the lake's surface, yet the mist never ceased to move. It curled like smoke, revealing for the briefest of moments shapes within, the faint silhouettes of a man and a woman standing together beneath a tree, their hands clasped, their faces calm. Some said it was Serwyn and Leaf, others said it was the gods themselves, watching as the age turned once more. Beneath the island, where the roots met the bones of the earth, the power that had once bound man and forest pulsed again. It called out to the north, to the blood of wolves, to the dreamers and the doomed alike. The pact was stirring. In Winterfell, the great heart tree shook as though caught in a storm, though the air was still. Snow fell from its branches in sheets. Servants fled, muttering of curses, but the lord of the castle only stood before it, his gray eyes filled with understanding. He felt the pull in his veins, the call of something older than all the crowns and wars of men. That night, he dreamt of the Isle. He saw the heart tree bathed in red light, its roots wrapped around the world itself. He heard Leaf's voice once more, soft, sorrowful, but sure. When the night is darkest, the forest will lend its strength. The blood that was given will be given again. Remember us. When he awoke, dawn had not yet broken, but he felt warmth where the snow should have been cold. The godswood was silent, save for the soft rustle of leaves that moved without wind. He bowed his head. "We remember," he whispered. "We are yours." On the Isle of Faces, the mists thickened until the island vanished entirely from mortal sight. The wind stilled, the lake froze over, and silence returned. Yet beneath the ice, the heart tree glowed faintly red, pulsing with the beat of the world's own heart. Its face, carved long ago by gods or men, seemed to smile, not in joy, but in calm understanding. For though the end approached, it was not the first end, nor would it be the last. The old gods knew that all things die and are reborn, that every fall is the seed of new spring, and so the Isle waited, patient as stone, while men marched to their destinies. The forest remembered. It always had, and it always would. Winter fell upon the world like a slow and heavy hand. The snows came early and did not melt. The rivers froze until even the fish lay still beneath their glassy prisons, and the trees groaned under the weight of ice. Across the north, the wind howled like a starving beast. It carried whispers, words too old for men to understand, yet they felt them in their bones. The long night had come again, and still, upon the Isle of Faces, the mists held their vigil. The lake lay frozen, the frost reaching from shore to shore like a pale bridge. Beneath that ice, roots still pulsed with dim red light. The heart tree stood tall above the silence, its crimson leaves unmoved by wind or snow. From its bark seeped faint lines of sap, bright as blood, gleaming in the moonlight. Far to the north, the wolves stirred. In Winterfell's Godswood, the old Weirwood shivered though there was no breeze. Its red eyes seemed to glisten with new life, and its branches creaked like bones waking from a long sleep. Beneath it stood the lord of the castle, his gray cloak dusted with snow, his hand resting on the hilt of a dark sword. He had dreamed again, of the Isle, of the woman with golden eyes, of a voice that whispered, "Remember." He did not understand what the dream demanded of him, but he knew this: the old gods had not abandoned them. They had waited. That night, as the snows thickened, a raven came beating its wings against his window. Its feathers were black as pitch, its eyes red as the weirwood's sap. The Lord opened the window, and the bird hopped to the sill, croaking a single word: "North." The Lord's heart turned cold. He knew what it meant. Beyond the wall, the dead were moving. The night's watch had fallen silent. No ravens had come from the frozen fortresses for months. Only this one, bearing a word of warning. He left before dawn. Through storm and snow he rode, following the call of duty and blood. Behind him trailed a handful of men sworn to the same gods, each bearing the mark of the north. They crossed the white plains where even the wind had teeth. They rode beneath skies where the stars seemed dimmed by the cold, and as they went, they prayed in silence, for words meant little against the end of the world. On the Isle of Faces, the heart tree began to glow. The red light that ran through its roots spread outward, winding through soil and stone, through rivers and frozen ground, reaching toward the wall itself. The old gods were stirring for the first time in an age. Beneath the ice of the lake, shadows moved. The water, frozen solid for months, began to crack and shift. A sound like the sigh of the earth echoed through the mists. Something was waking. It was not Leaf, for she had long joined the wood, nor Serwyn, whose bones had turned to soil. It was the forest itself, the memory of all that had ever been, every drop of blood, every leaf that had fallen, every whisper of prayer. They rose together, not as flesh, but as will. The heart tree spoke. Its voice was not a sound, but a tremor felt in every root and river. The night comes again, and the world forgets, but we remember. Across the north, every weirwood answered. The forest shook, and the red leaves whispered as one. In every godswood, the faces carved long ago seemed to breathe. The wind carried their chorus. We remember. The men riding through the blizzard heard it too. Some thought it only the wind, others fell to their knees and wept. The Lord at their head felt the sound in his very blood, and it filled him with a strange calm. The fear that had haunted him for nights faded. He looked to the horizon and saw the faint shimmer of the wall beneath the moonlight. The battle awaited. When they reached the great wall, they found the watch broken. The gates stood open, the torches burned low, and the courtyard was filled with silence. Not a man stirred, though footprints marred the snow, prints that led away into the dark beyond. The Lord of Winterfell dismounted. "They're gone," he said softly. "All of them." A young rider swallowed hard. "Gone where?" He looked toward the north, where the world seemed to end in shadow, to meet the dead. That night, they lit no fires. The cold itself felt alive. From the forests beyond the wall came a faint blue light, growing brighter with every hour. The dead were marching. And then the earth trembled. Beneath their feet, deep in the frozen soil, the roots of the world moved. The sound of it echoed through the mountains, a slow, steady thrum. The old gods had woken fully now. The pact had been renewed. Far away, upon the Isle of Faces, the heart tree burned red as dawn. From its roots rose a figure, no longer woman, not Holy Spirit, but something between. Leaf in the dew, reborn from sap and memory, her golden eyes now glowing like embers. She stood upon the shore, her feet leaving no mark in the frost. "The time has come," she said. "The forest keeps its word." She raised her hand, and the lake cracked. From beneath the ice rose the shapes of long-dead weirwoods, their trunks pale as bone, their branches bare. They stood like an army around her, ancient and terrible. Each one bore a face, and each face turned north. The forest remembers. Across the land, the same words stirred in the hearts of those who still kept faith. In Winterfell, in the swamps of the Neck, in the frozen woods beyond the wall, men and women felt the pulse of the trees. They felt strength fill their limbs, courage fill their hearts. The dead had their cold, but the living had their roots. And so, when the night at last reached its darkest hour, the Weirwood shone with red light, and the wolves of Winterfell marched to war. Their breath steamed in the air, and their eyes gleamed like silver under the moon. The old gods watched from their carved faces, silent and still, as they had since the dawn of time. Leaf stood upon the isle, her hair streaming in the wind. In her hand, she held a single crimson leaf, the first that had ever fallen from the first Weirwood of Westeros. She kissed it once, then let it drift into the lake. "Blood for life," she whispered. "Life for peace." The leaf touched the water and burned like fire, though no flame consumed it. Its light spread through the mist, across the lake, through the roots of the earth. From the north to the south, from mountain to sea, the world trembled. The dawn that followed was red as blood and bright as hope. The dead would not prevail that day, nor the next. Whether the world would rise whole again, no man could say. But upon the Isle of Faces, where the first seed had been planted, the forest stood eternal. The heart tree's eyes gleamed with peace, and its mouth curved into the faintest smile. The wars of men would come and go. The dragons would burn and fall. The kingdoms would rise and crumble, but the isle would remain. And in every whisper of leaves, in every prayer spoken beneath a red canopy, the same truth echoed, soft and sure. The forest remembers, always. The mists closed once more around the isle, hiding it from the eyes of men. The lake lay still, the air heavy with silence. Yet beneath that stillness, life pulsed strong. The same life that had begun in blood, fire, and faith unbroken. The first Weirwood tree in Westeros stood unmoving at the heart of the world, its crimson leaves eternal against the sky. And in its roots, where the spirit of Leaf and Serwyn slept side by side, the old gods dreamed on.